Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Strange Podcast and YouTube video show. I am Denise from Colorado Martini, and we are presenting this on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Generations Found, which is a channel by Colorado Martini. The Generations Found YouTube channel is a channel that acknowledges people who have been mostly forgotten or whose stories need to be told. In addition, we feature some graves and tombstones of famous and infamous people and associated events. We invite you to subscribe to our main channel, Colorado Martini and Generations Found. So after this live, make sure that you check out our latest video called Real Horror, the Colorado Cannibal, Alfred Packer. In that video, we will take you to the Littleton Cemetery to visit Alfred. I'm excited. I'm really excited about tonight's guest. They are personal friends and are well-respected podcasters of the Ordinary, Extraordinary Cemetery. Welcome, Jenny and Diane.
Thank you so much for inviting us to do this with you tonight.
Yeah, we were very excited.
We're so glad to have you. We've been friends with Colorado Martini. Patrick and I have been friends with these guys for quite some time. And so we're very excited. We love having them on our show. We've had them once before. We've had Jenny. Diane couldn't make it that particular show. And we talked about Central City. We were actually going to do a different subject, and we ended up talking the whole show about Central City.
I remember that. We had so much to talk about. That's the whole show.
Yeah, the whole show took up Central City. It's a good subject.
It is.
So tell us about your podcast.
So our podcast, we started our podcast a little over 2.5 years ago. And the main goal of our podcast, or one of the main goals, is to, like this channel, tell the stories of those buried in cemeteries, mainly in the U.S., but we've also featured stories from other countries. The US ones are just the easier ones for us to do all the research for. It's a show for anybody who might have an interest in cemeteries, whether that's somebody who casually visits them or preservationists, or just anybody who wants to know more about history and stories and the people that helped our country become what it is.
Well, you guys have been around for how long now?
It's 2.5 years. It'll be 3 years in October.
Oh,
so
that's
our
wonderful.
our first episode aired October 8th of 2020. Before Diane and I had actually ever met in person, which we always love telling that story.
Yeah.
We had met on completely separate places, right? Isn't one of you like down south?
No, we're like an hour from each other.
Yes, because I'm on the south end of Denver and she's all the way down in Colorado Springs. So when we first started doing the podcast, when I'd asked Diane to be my co-host, she was a little hesitant at first. But I said, don't worry about it. We'll figure this out as we go. And we generally use Zoom to record all of our podcasts with each other. And that's worked out beautifully for the last 2.5 years. We just log on every week and cover whatever topic we're covering. And it's worked great when we've had a lot of really cool guests on the show. So it's worked really great. And about a year after we started recording, we finally met each other in person. So
well, that was the same with you and I.
Yes, that's true. We hadn't met each other in person.
You and I had known each other for quite some time online. We both knew that we were, cemetery lovers, and I met you and Roxy, who's in the chat, it looks like.
I did see Roxy. Hi, Roxy.
Hi, Roxy. Met for the first time to go see Alfred Packer. It's grave, and you did a presentation on Alfred Packer next graveside, which was really cool. That was very, very cool. And that was the first time I had met you, you and Roxy, and we've been good friends ever since. So it's just been wonderful. And then one day I'll get to meet Diane.
Yes, definitely.
She's saying hi, Pink, waving.
I figured you were
She
waving.
says, Roxy says we had lunch with Alfred.
We did have lunch with Alfred. That was kind of the premise for everybody who is in our little Facebook group for Colorado cemeteries. We said, hey, we're all going to meet down there if you want to come have lunch with him. And then we did the presentation, and then people got to walk around the cemetery and take pictures, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun to have lunch with the Colorado Cannibal.
So tell us what you know about the cannibal.
So Alfred Packer was born on January 21st, 1842 in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. So he's not originally from Colorado. His parents were James Packer and Esther Griner. I think that's how you say her maiden name, Packer. And his father was a farmer and a cabinet maker for most of Alfred's life. And he was one of 3 children. He was the youngest of 3 children. As an adult, or as a young man, I should say, he did join the Union Army during the Civil War. He first enlisted in April of 1862 in Minnesota. And at that time, he was enlisted. He gave his profession as a shoemaker. And then he was honorably discharged shortly after that. I forgot to put the date down on that because he had epilepsy. So
I actually know the date.
Do you have the date?
The things I have up here. Yeah, it's 1863.
Thank you. Yeah, it was he was discharged because allegedly he had epilepsy. And I always kind of take the epilepsy diagnosis for these older ones with sort of a grain of salt, because epilepsy was used to diagnose a lot of conditions at the time because they medically hadn't figured out all the different medical conditions. So it was less than a year though. However, he did re-enlist again in June of 1863 when he was in Iowa, but again was only in for a short time before he was out again due to his epilepsy. There was, and it does make me believe it might be some form of epilepsy because there was some like record of seizures that he would have, but that made it very difficult for him to perform the necessary duties as a soldier. So he was once again discharged from the Army, both times honorably though. So it was not, I've heard rumors of dishonorable discharges, but records show that he was honorably discharged both times.
Okay. And then after he left the Army for the second time, he spent about 9 years doing a variety of jobs, including hunter, wagon teamster, and that, ranch hand, miner. And, it was said due to his health, it was hard for him to hold down jobs for long periods. Also, he tried to be a guide, but he got lost easily, which, he's a typical man. He didn't ask for directions.
He didn't want to stop and ask for directions,
He did make it to Colorado, and he did try some mining here for a time, but he wasn't very successful. And then he moved on to Utah for a while, but it was said he wasn't well liked, and people accused him of being a liar and a thief. He liked to start fights, and he was a loner. But, if he had a medical condition that may have caused him to maybe behave in certain ways, or maybe he was a loner because it was difficult for him to be around people.
That could be. He also had a gambling habit, apparently. And actually, his gambling habit is partially what led to some of his trouble later. But so when he did have a job and when he did have money, he tended to gamble it away quite often, which happened a lot back in those days. There were a lot of guys who did that same thing. They would get a little bit of money and they'd go into the gambling halls, and then they would lose all their money and they'd be starting all over again.
However, he had this really high, squeaky voice that was like that really irritated people.
Oh, see, and again, I wonder, if he had some sort of medical condition, if maybe that was a part of his condition, and maybe it did grate on people. And when you look at his picture, he doesn't look like, he looks like he'd have a deep sort of gruffy voice, but maybe not. Maybe that would like turn people off when they heard a higher pitched voice coming out of this gruff-looking man.
Well, I heard that was one of the attributes that got him caught. So they weren't sure if it was him when they saw him, and he lost, I think, his index finger and a tip of another finger in the mining industry in Georgetown, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one of the identifying things. And his voice, that he was in a bar and his voice was so high that it was one of those things where they went, yeah, that's him. Nobody has that obnoxious of a voice than Alfred Packer.
I did not know that, but I love that fact about him. And that wouldn't surprise me if that was something that helped. So the big story about Alfred Packer. So there's not a whole lot that we know about his early life other than what we just kind of discussed. There's not a lot of other records that talk about, anything else that went on in his life. But we do know that in early November of 1873, Packer left Brigham Canyon, Utah. So there was a group of miners down there that had heard about some mining here in Colorado. So he left Brigham County, Utah to lead a party of 21 men bound for the gold fields near Breckenridge, Colorado. Again, we know he wasn't the best person for the job. And it was a very difficult and long 3 months to get from that part of Utah to the area near Breckenridge, Colorado, where they ended up. And of course, they left in November. And you have to think about the weather out here and in Utah, Wyoming, not probably the best time to travel across any of those states, especially by horse or wagon or whatever they were using to travel, because it's cold. There's a ton of snow. They're fighting the wind the whole way. Like, even, the majority of the Native American tribes in the area tended to settle down in the winter somewhere and kind of park it until the weather got better.
And usually on the plain rather than up in the mountains.
Yeah, the rugged mountains. Exactly.
They will still never understand what led and it wasn't just him at this point. It was 21 other men who were like, this is a great time to head over there and try and beat all these other people to this gold in this mountain.
Well, the Donner Party did the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good example of not sitting down and waiting.
Well, just so the audience knows, all three of us are in Colorado. And we all know too well what those mountains are like in the wintertime. And especially we know November is not when you leave on any kind of trek. You don't even go hiking. No. Because you can be caught in avalanches, deep snow. Just recently on the news, people were losing their shoes because their hiking boots, because the snow was so deep, they had to be rescued.
I saw that.
And they couldn't get their shoe out of the snow. And that's modern times. And even in the winters here, we're like, I don't want to drive up there.
Yeah,
so
it's a little
going there in those days.
Really especially in the higher elevations, anytime from late September through May, not the best time to head up into the mountains. Just saying, our elevations are high enough. You don't really want to be up there too much. But these guys decided they were going for it. So they arrived in the Ute Indian chief Uray's near Montrose, Colorado. They arrived there that February. So they started in 1873, February of 1874. They finally arrived kind of at the base of the mountains where they wanted to go. And the camp at that time, Chief Uray, his people, they actually welcomed these guys into their camp. They helped provide food and shelter and everything, realizing that these guys were pretty hard up by the time they got to them, and they needed to be able to rest and not go on. And they were invited to stay in the camp until spring and until the weather got better. However, Packer and 5 other men decided they weren't going to stay there. They were determined, again, this is February, and there's probably several feet of snow on the ground at this point. They were still determined to get up into the mountains and look for this gold. So they told Chief Uray, thanks, but no thanks, basically is what they said, kind of packed up whatever they had, and they decided to continue on. So the other men, in addition to Packer, were Shannon Bell, James Humphrey, Frank Miller, George Noon, and Israel Swan. So there were 6 of them that left that February to go up further into the mountains.
Well, even this spring, we had over how many feet of snow in the mountains, and it kept going and going. I mean, it kept falling and falling, where there was about was it 104 inches? And wasn't it in Breckenridge?
Oh,
This
I
year?
just-
Broke this spring,
Yeah.
this supposed spring. So, and that, okay, can you
yeah,
imagine?
and we're gonna have like major flooding. There was like so much snow, and back then too, they had a
Right.
lot of snow, more so than we get now. I mean, I remember when I was a teen and I used to come to Colorado, it just seems like it snowed more then
Mhm.
than it does now. And this is probably the hardest winter that we've had since I've lived here.
Yeah, it's been a
And
very long one. And you have to
yeah,
think about it. All that snow, once it does melt, it will flood. It floods the rivers, it floods the creeks.
Exactly.
It causes, in the winter, you worry about the avalanches. In the spring and early summer, you're worried about the flooding and the flash floods and all the things that can happen due to the melting snow. So again, these 6 gentlemen just weren't quite thinking all of this through based on, I know they were a little tougher back then, but come on, I still wouldn't have done it.
Well, and then when they did go, they ran out of food,
Mhm.
of course. It's not like they could easily find, venison or anything because it was that much snow. It had been difficult for them to find food. But then they ran out of food, and so they were left to have to eat their moccasins. It was sad. I mean, the moccasins were leather, so
it was common to do that.
Very common.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds sort of weird, but it was common.
They boiled them down to make something to eat.
It was like, giving your dog a rawhide toy, but
Exactly.
and then in time, I mean, their trail was snowed over and they had, the snow had blown into patches, and they were just and then sometime it was said that they were actually eating the little buds off the rose bushes. I mean, which was actually,
Rose hips.
rose hips are very nutritious.
High in vitamin C.
High in vitamin C, yes, thank you. But so they were down. That's what they were eating. I mean, it's not even they could probably even dig to the ground and find anything else because there was so much snow.
And this was in a very short period of time after they left Chief Ouray. Like it was within a week or two of them leaving his camp. They didn't have enough provisions with them. So they ran out real fast, real quick, and they were kind of stuck.
So
I heard that they lost a lot of their provisions in crossing a river.
That is one of the stories that was told that, they got things got wet and then washed away. Mm-hmm. So guess what? They didn't have any food now.
Right. Plus crossing a river in
winter.
In Rocky Mountains in the winter.
Again, maybe not the smartest group of guys this time around. So with all of this, eventually 9 weeks after they left Ouray's camp, and about 9 weeks later, Packer, arrives at the Los Pinos Indian Agency, which is where Gunnison, Colorado is now. He's got very few things with him. He's carrying a Winchester rifle, a skinning knife, and a coffee pot. That's it. That's all he's got left with him. But he was alone. The other 5 men were not with him. So, of course, they were like, well, where's the rest of your party? Because people knew that he'd had a party of men with him, right? And so they were like, where's the rest of your party? So first he claimed that he had become separated from his companions during a blizzard, and he was able to survive on rabbits and rosebuds. That was his story. But people got really suspicious really quick because they discovered that Packer had a lot of like money and some other items belonging to the men he had traveled with on himself. And so they didn't quite believe that story that he got separated during a blizzard. I'd also heard at one point that he said he was scouting for like a different trail or something to lead them. He left the group on purpose doing a little scouting thing. And then this blizzard came up, hit him, and they all perished in this blizzard. So either way, that was his story, that he wasn't with them initially, and then they got stuck in the snow. But he was part of the reason he got caught with all the stuff is because he went and gambled. And people were kind of suspicious about this guy who'd been lost in the mountains for 9 weeks. Why all of a sudden does he have money to gamble with when he hasn't worked and he hasn't done anything and he was near starving? There was suspicions were definitely raised. So then he told a new story. Do you want to share that new story, Diane?
Let's see. Well, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I can do it if you need me to.
After questioning, Packer confessed that the real story was far more gruesome.
Yeah.
4 of the men, he claimed, had died naturally from the extreme winter conditions, and the starving survivors ate them. So they died, and then it was just like,
Yeah, he said
it was
himself
there
and one
for
other
them to
man
eat.
ate them.
So when only Packer and one other man, Shannon Bell, remained alive, Bell went insane and threatened to kill Packer. Packer said he shot Bell in self-defense and eventually ate him.
So people were horrified by that story, but also it wasn't necessarily a new story. It had happened before with other men who'd gone into the mountains, other groups who'd gone into the mountains, traveling through whatever. So he probably could have gotten away with it as being like a survival story. But as the snows melted, as spring really came on going into summer, searchers actually found the remains of the 5 men. And this particular sketch was done of it.
It's basically
and
the crime scene sketch.
yeah, this is the crime scene sketch. So you have your skeletal bodies at this point.
Pretty gruesome.
But the way they were found, the manner in which they were found, did not support his story. So his second story was that they had died kind of along the way, as the winter got worse and the weather got worse, and they were dying one by one. But they found all of the men together at the same sort of campsite. So the story just didn't add up. And so Packer was arrested for murder. However, he was not in custody for long before he escaped from jail. And he was gone for 9 years before anybody figured out where he was. And he left the state of Colorado. He actually went to, and I don't know when he went to, we don't know this part of it. We just know where he was found. So he may have been in Colorado some of that time, maybe in Wyoming. When he was found 9 years later, though, they did find him in Fort Fetterman in Wyoming, and he was living under a new name of John Schwartz.
And I'm sure it was pretty hard for him to like totally disappear if he had that distinctive voice.
And the fingers.
And then again, after his second arrest, his story changed for the 3rd time.
Yeah.
In court, he said that all 6 men had made camp alive, but lost and starving, they were too weak to go on. One day, Packer went in search of the trail. He was going to save them. So he probably told everybody.
The man who doesn't know his camp very well.
Yeah, who gets lost. Upon returning several hours later, he discovered to his horror that Bell had gone mad, killed the other 4 with a hatchet, and was boiling the flesh of one of them for his meal. It sounds very Donner-ish. When Bell spotted Packer, he charged with his hatchet raised, and Packer shot him twice in the belly. Lost and trapped alone in a camp of dead men, Packer said he only resorted to cannibalism after several more days, when it was his only means of survival. I mean, I can't even imagine of staying in camp that long with all those bodies. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to death. However, his death sentence was converted. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. However, the death sentence was converted to 40 years in the state penitentiary in Canyon City, Colorado, and it was about 1885 or 86.
Yeah, Colorado had changed their position on the death penalty. And so while he was still awaiting, he was on death row, he got grandfathered into this clause of, we can't sentence you to death because you were sentenced before Colorado became
changed it.
Yeah, so they changed it to a life sentence. So he was 40 years. But yeah, he just was not believable to that jury at that point. They were like, there's no way one guy went crazy, killed everybody, and then you saved yourself from the one guy. Like his story just wasn't believable. And unfortunately for him, there were character witnesses and stuff that could attribute to the fact that he was a liar, that he had stolen stuff in the past. Like there was enough other evidence to support him as not being a truthful man. And the fact that he kept changing his story about what happened up there didn't help him either. So
Well, plus, when he first got arrested, he was put into a jail in Saguache, Colorado, and escaped from there, which didn't give him a whole credibility. Changed his name, like you said, and went to Wyoming and had to be captured a second time. And so that doesn't give you much credibility, just that alone.
That makes you look pretty darn guilty at that point.
Yeah. So. But then if you had a chance to escape after being accused of killing and eating at least part of the remains of 6 people, I think any of us probably would want to try to escape too.
And I don't think people were obviously grossed out by the whole cannibalist aspect of it. Had it been more of the situation like the Donner Party, who was trapped for so long, and how some of them did actually end up succumbing to cannibalism. None of the Donner Party, though, was ever charged with murder.
Oh, no. Yeah.
All of this. He was, they obviously, when they found the bodies, they could tell that these guys had been murdered, that they didn't just die of starvation and cold. Yeah. They had proof of being murdered on their bodies. And the only person that could have done it at that point was Alfred Packer, because he was the only one that survived the whole ordeal. So
going back to that sketch, the crime scene sketch, here, we'll go back. This one, looking at that, they would know if it was a bear,
right?
Having these body parts all over the place. They would know if it was a bear. You can tell when it's a bear. It has teeth marks. But these guys had hatchet marks, and knife marks on their person. And then this picture is a modern picture of an archaeological dig where they found them. They actually found the bodies in modern times back in, I want to say 2004. So we have modern forensics looking at it also. And they and they look at these and say, yeah, this was definitely cannibalism. These bones were cut.
Yeah, they weren't just mauled by animals or anything. They knew that these poor men had been murdered and murdered to be eaten. That was why they were killed. And this is only speculation. Again, we don't know because none of us were there, and the only witness is Alfred Packer himself. But you would have to think, in order to get away with it, he would have had to kill them all about the same time. There's no way he could, they were probably all asleep or something when he killed them.
Right.
And maybe he did fight with Bell at one point. Maybe Bell woke up. Maybe there was a fight and he ended up shooting Bell. But the only plausible explanation was that he did end up killing them. And I guarantee he was probably desperate and hungry. They all were at that point.
Yeah.
Because they made the poor choice to go up into the mountains at the wrong time of year and didn't properly have proper provisions, nothing. They were just kind of greedy is what I kind of look at. Like all of them had this moment of greed and desire to just get to something before somebody else could. And unfortunately, it led to the deaths of 5 of them and a life of miserableness really for Packer after that because of what he did.
Well, I remember watching an episode of Mysteries at the Museum.
Love that show.
At the museum. And they went to the Saguache Museum and they actually had the gun. They had found it, I don't know, within recently or anyway, they found the gun that supposedly was Alfred Packer's gun that he said that he shot Bell with.
Yes.
And that there was everything that he said was backed up by the gun that they had found. So, I tried to find the episode before this call so I could remember exactly what it said. But this may have been able to exonerate Alfred if it had been found, before, at the time when all this was going on.
Well, this gun,
what he said.
I believe when I was putting my notes together, I think the gun itself was found back in 1950. So, and I think the museum has had it since about 1950. But they were able to, match it up with some of the other evidence And they did actually try to, there was a point, and I don't remember when it happened. I want to say it was early 2000s, where somebody who had been studying the case based on this evidence and some other evidence that they had done forensically and stuff, they were trying to actually get an official pardon for Packer, but it had been denied. So he still has not been pardoned. But even before he died, while he was in prison, newspaper reporter Polly Pry, who was big time famous here in Colorado in her day, she...
I have to ask, have you visited her grave in Fairview?
I have. She's buried at Fairmount.
Fairmont, I mean, I always say Fairview because it's where I come from, there's a Fairview.
And there's a Fairview in Colorado Springs.
Yes, down the road. I could walk to it if I so wanted.
No, she's buried at Fairmount, and actually she is part of their women's history tour that they give. She's a stop along that tour. And she is a fascinating woman in her own right. And she is a planned subject for our podcast in the future, because she led a really cool life for a woman reporter in the late early 1900s. She's very cool. So she went to the jail and she visited Packer while he was in prison, and she convinced him to finally give an interview. After he got convicted and sent to jail, he refused to talk to any more press. He was kind of over this. He was like, fine, whatever. I'm going to be in jail for the rest of my life. He wasn't giving interviews. Didn't matter what. Somehow Polly charmed him, I think, into giving her an interview. She was very attractive. I've seen pictures of her. She was a very attractive lady. And you have to think, by 1901, he'd been in jail for a number of years at that point. So maybe it was flattery. I don't know. Anyway, she convinced him to give her an interview, and it was actually over a series of interviews. She went back and visited him several times, and he told his side of the story without feeling the pressure of the courts and the lawyers and all of that. And she really began to believe that he did what he had to do to survive, that it was really a survival thing. It wasn't that he had any malice towards the men, that he wanted to kill them, and that he was really kind of innocent. He had killed them and he had eaten them, yes, but she didn't feel he was guilty of outright murder as he had been accused and sentenced to.
Right, because cannibalism was actually not illegal.
Right.
But manslaughter was. And so if he killed them to eat them, they could accuse him of manslaughter, but not of cannibalism.
Right. And one of her arguments, so she went to her boss at the Denver Post, and she said, I want to do an article on him. I have all this information, these interviews, whatever. One of her arguments in his favor was that sailors are allowed to eat the bodies of other sailors when they're stuck out at sea.
Oh, really?
Yes. This was one of her big key arguments. So she's like, why can't that be true for somebody who's stuck in the mountains like that? If that's your last means, your last resort, you should be able to do that and not be accused of murder for that. So if sailors can do it, so can mountain men. That was kind of one of her big key points in her argument. The Post was quite happy to continue printing these stories because a lot of people were reading them. They were very interested in her writing and what she was saying. This was probably one of the biggest news stories. She did a lot of news stories, but this was, at this point in her career, one of the biggest news stories of her career, because she had gotten him to talk and she was sharing all these things and she did her research to back him up. So then she convinced the Post to hire a new lawyer for him to try and get him acquitted or at least released from prison. And it was a very high-powered attorney, and it worked. He was able to get Packer paroled from prison. And so he was not officially acquitted or anything. He was just paroled, and he was told you can't leave the state of Colorado, all of that, but he no longer had to be in prison. And so after that, he actually settled in the Littleton, Colorado area, and that's where he would live out the rest of his life. The other fun part of this story, well, it's not really fun, but I find it fascinating, is after he was released, the owners of the Denver Post, who had paid for this high-priced attorney for him, found out that the attorney had not only charged them for his services, but he had charged Packer also for his services. So the owners of the Post were not happy about this at all. And they were like, you need to give him back his money. Like, he's a man fresh out of prison. He has no job. He has, nothing. You need to pay him back. And the lawyer was like, no, I'm not going to do that. They ended up, and they had, at that point, they had actually like called him down to the Denver Post, and there was a shootout. The lawyer pulled out his gun. Remember, it's 1901. This totally normal.
Yeah,
He
still
pulled
the
out
Wild
his
West,
gun and
sort of.
started shooting at the owners. And he did end up shooting them both. Polly Pry was there. She was all part of this. She actually jumped in front of one of them to try and save him. And he was like, the lawyer told her to move or she would be shot as well. But she just stood her ground, and it gave enough time for the actual cops to get there and arrest him. And she was able to help bandage her injured bosses at the time, and they both ended up surviving the gunshot wounds.
Oh my goodness, I've never heard
She used her
story.
dress. I mean, she used her dress. She didn't
she
like,
tore
she
up parts of
wasn't
her dress and like bandaged their wounds with it.
which is amazing in and of itself, because you think of, or we think, or we're taught to believe that women at that time were just so faint-hearted and they would faint at the sight of blood or whatever. And here she is like standing up, protecting her boss with this attorney who has a gun, and she just probably didn't even think twice about using her dress to stop the bleeding, which is
well, there's also a chance
cool.
there was some blood splatter on it too if she was close enough.
Sorry,
she's like, well, this dress is ruined already.
Yeah, she's on my to-do list to do a video on.
She is, like I said, that's just, there's so much more about her that I won't even go into here because it has nothing to do with Alfred Packer, but she is one of the biggest reasons he was at least paroled from prison, because she really believed that what he did was for survival. And she was able to really kind of convince the public of that at the time through her articles that she wrote about him. And of course, they hired a really good attorney that was able to convince the courts that he shouldn't be in jail. So like we said, he spent the rest of his life living in the Deer Creek area of Littleton. He kind of kept to himself, though. Once he got out of prison, he didn't go back to, gambling and trying to do all these crazy things that he had done leaving to prison. Of course, he was much older by then, too. He was in his 60s by then. There's also claims that after he got out of prison, he became a vegetarian.
Yeah, I had heard that before, too.
Yeah, I have, too. Is that really true, though?
We don't know. It's totally speculation. It's just kind of a fun part of his story, which is why I share it. But I don't know that there's any actual proof to that. But maybe he was like, I'm kind of done with meat. I'm over it. He died on April 23rd, 1907. His death certificate mentions senility, trouble, and worry. It sounds like he may have been in the early phases of some sort of dementia. And of course, we know he had lifelong health problems from the time he was a very young man. But at the time he died, he was 65 years old.
Yeah, because definitely if he had the epilepsy or whatever that was causing the seizures, that would definitely probably explain the dementia, because he really, he still wasn't that old.
No, 65. Not really, but he obviously suffered from health issues and stuff up until that point. But he apparently, for those last few years of his life when he was living in Littleton, he did keep to himself. Neighbors said he was a good neighbor. He was a quiet man. He didn't cause problems. So obviously, he was sort of a changed man by the end of his life. Maybe being in prison made him understand that lying and cheating and stealing and things like that wasn't the best way to live your life. And obviously he didn't want to go back to prison because he never did anything after that would have gotten him rearrested and put back in jail for anything.
So the things that we're looking at on the screen is from his, rap sheet. Under his mug shot. It kind of describes, he was 5'10" and a half, so he wasn't a very tall man.
Mm-mm.
And this is when he was in the Saguache jail. So he was 38 at the time. So this goes under, hold on, let me go back.
I like that his hair is listed as chestnut.
This is this mugshot close. It's a close up of that.
Right.
He was only out 6 years before he died.
Yeah, he did not have much time for his freedom.
He had blue eyes.
So yeah.
Says he was a harness maker. So a story about when he was in jail down in Canyon City. He used to get conned all the time. So he used to get a pension from being in the Civil War. And so they used to, the other inmates used to swindle him out of his money all the time, say, we're going to work on getting you freed, give us money and we'll help you. We know people and stuff. And so he would give them money and they would totally con him out of his money because they couldn't stand him.
Ugh, poor guy.
Yeah, I was wondering how he survived after he got out of prison, but yeah, he did have his Civil War pension, which wasn't much, but it was 1906.
1901 to 1907.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was enough probably.
Well, and he apparently, the harness maker, he was making harnesses in jail too. When he was put in prison in Canyon City, that was one of the jobs he actually did in Canyon City. The prisoners there did a lot of different type of work, but that apparently was one of the jobs he actually did in prison as well.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Well, one of the pictures I have is him.
Stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry, Diane.
No, I was gonna say a lot of them did crafting. They did.
Yes.
They made things. They made lots and lots of things.
Well,
Yeah.
I've got a picture somewhere here, and yes, Roxy, as you see that, we'll come to it.
We'll get back to it.
We'll get back to it. But yeah, he made. I have a picture of a bullhorn. I'm not a bull, bison horn, and he made a pin cushion out of it. And so the top of the horn has the pin cushion on top, and he made that in jail, and that's at the I think History Colorado is where I found that. And so so they have actual artifacts of the things that he made down in Canyon City, because the jail he was in Saguache was a small little cabin-looking building.
Yeah, it was
a full-on jail.
Right. It was the Western version of you need somewhere to put the bad guys for a little bit type of jail.
Yeah, very small little adobe building. So
exactly. But as we all know, us being Coloradans, the Canyon City jail is a full-on prison. And I actually show a picture of that in the video that's coming out after we adjourn from here. I have that in that video that's going to be coming out. And then this is even a closer look at that rap sheet, and it says marks and scars. First
and
fourth? I think it says fourth finger off left hand. So remember I was saying that.
I think it's first and fourth. I think that's a little ampersand in there. So first.
So I know he lost his index finger in mining, and then he lost most of the tip of the second finger in a mining accident in Georgetown, Colorado.
And then a small scar over his right eye.
So, and with that squeaky voice, you can't hide.
Yeah, when you're missing the right fingers, you have the right scar, and you have a distinctive voice, it's going to be a little bit harder to hide. And I mean, there were a lot of people at that time who could leave one place and start brand new, change their name, whatever, and act differently and get away with it. But you have to also think the mining community moved around a lot. Yeah. They went between the different states where mining was happening. So anytime a new discovery was made, new mines opened it up, whatever, those miners traveled along those same trails. So it's not a particularly hard thing to think that 9 years later, somebody that had been in Colorado with him at one point or Utah would recognize him, and they could totally make that arrest then.
Well, even in Wyoming, when he was going by a different name, those distinctive characteristics, he would not have been able to.
John and Alfred, you're right. John and Alfred were definitely the same person.
Yes.
Well, and this picture is where the bodies were found recently, which was like in 2004, if I have my dates right, where they actually located the bodies. They were very shallowly buried, and the people who buried them were the original investigators.
Yes.
They just buried them on site, and they buried them very shallow. And so you used to be able to visit this massacre site outside of Lake City, Colorado, but it's on private property now. And that's why I put the word closed on there, because you can't visit it anymore. And I'd had it on my bucket list for years to go up there. And then COVID started, and we just never made it up there. And now it's closed because the property's been purchased. And it was I was very bummed. But that's what this is about. This is the actual sign where the site is. and then they found part of this. This is part of the skull of Frank Reddy Miller. This is part of his skull, and this is in a museum in Lake City, the actual courthouse where he was prosecuted. Is a museum now, and you can go in and they have quite a few artifacts for Alfred Packer, and that's just outside of Leadville.
Yes, it's on my bucket list to visit.
I know, it's like totally on my bucket list. And then this morbid scene was part of the wax museum, the Denver Wax Museum eons ago. And this is a picture from a postcard. So you actually would send this to people, which cracks me up that this was a postcard.
People just love this. They love this kind of stuff.
The macabre postcards that people would send. I love it.
I know. What I love is how red the skeletons are.
It's the skeletons that are red too. It's not even like meat left on their bones. They're just red skeletons.
That's just red skeletons. I thought this was hysterical. And then to answer Roxy's question on, does CU still have an Alfred Packer grill? And I work for the University of Colorado Boulder, and yes, they do. And
that's cool.
And they're the subject of my pictures quite often. So this is a picture of the grill. So there's Alfred.
Yep. Right as you're getting all your food.
Exactly. So these are all the students just getting their lunch and stuff.
And they've had the grill since 1968. That's when they decided to name it after him. So it's been there for quite some time.
I love it that they have a sense of humor and they haven't had to change it.
Yeah, exactly, because everybody laughs that sees it. I mean, they just think it's hysterical. There's even a bust, a sculpture of him there. And, so this is like a food court kind of place. So each thing is named after Al. And then I'll turn this one over to you about the musical, Jenny.
So if anybody is familiar with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, that they're the creators of South Park. They're now the new owners of our infamous
Casa
what's our restaurant?
Casa Bonita.
Casa Bonita. They just took over ownership of that. But Trey Parker and Matt Stone went to CU Boulder and also were influenced by their cafe. And I believe one of them, and I don't know if it was Trey or Matt,
it was Trey,
had grown up hearing about Alfred Packer, right? And the whole stories and everything. So they were inspired to write a musical about Mr. Packer and his deeds back in 1993. So they made Cannibal the musical. It apparently didn't do great. And it's very much, I've read through some of the scripting and things like that. It's definitely a Matt Stone, Trey Parker production. The language, the way it's worded, the songs, all of that. But I think it's kind of become a cult classic. And if anybody has a copy of it, I'm guessing it's great. I happen to have a copy of it. I've actually never watched it. It's my
That's what you're doing this weekend.
It's not my own personal copy. Dave had it before I met him. And it was in our collection. So it's always stayed in our movie collection. I've just never sat down and watched it. Surprise, surprise.
Might this weekend. You might be watching it this weekend.
I totally had every intention of watching this before we sat down to do this tonight. But I have been busy every single night this week with something. So it just hasn't happened. But it's definitely on my list of things to watch.
You're going to have to. You got to let us know.
And a lot of wine.
And yeah. Maybe not the red wine, although I think that's all the wine I have in my fridge right now is red wine. But,
Well, us Coloradans, the three of us being Coloradans for you that have just joined us, love our cannibal.
We do.
We make fun of him all the time, such as the CU grill. And he's just the butt of a lot of jokes. And he's like kind of this honorable citizen of Colorado. And it's just because it's fun. It's fun to talk about him and stuff. So here's a couple of these bullet points or a couple of things that kind of shows you how Colorado loves their cannibal. So CU is the University of Colorado Boulder. We call it CU in these parts. But CU used to celebrate Alfred Packer Days, which reportedly included a raw meat toss contest. Packard was even celebrated at the Colorado State Capitol. A New York Times report from July 8th, 1982 details the unveiling of a bust. That's that bust I was talking about. It's actually in front of the CU grill now, of Packard at the Capitol, placing, I mean, we're talking our state capitol.
Well,
placing the 19th century cannibal for the first time being amongst many of Colorado's most esteemed statesmen. I mean, seriously, you go into this capitol, there's like all these esteemed people that not necessarily were statesmen, but just esteemed people of our state and history. And there's Alfred Packard. Yeah, it's like, so that's the way Colorado is. In 1998, author J.E. Banks published Alfred Packard's Wilderness Cookbook. According to the Littleton Independent, Littleton held the Alfred Packard Cannibal Fast Food 5K and 10K run walk, which passed by Packard's grave as recently as 2019, which leads us into our next subject, his grave, which is something that all of us love. Is going
knife
to
and
graveyard.
Oh my gosh.
That and the knife and fork, and actually this little jar with the spoon, not currently there. This picture is from when we went and met up there. The cemetery has since cleaned it up because a lot of people leave a lot of things at his gravesite. So every now and then they have to go through and clean it up just to, otherwise it would be overwhelming and it would be a mess. I have actually been in the cemetery on several occasions, not at his grave, but because he's in the historic section where I like to hang out, I will see cars drive right there. They get out, they take a few pictures, they get back in and they leave the cemetery. Like they go specifically to visit Alfred Packer and that's it.
Well, it's funny because the video that's going to come out right after we talk on our channel, Generations Found, we at the end of the video, where we show a clip of we're laughing. Mr. Martini and I are laughing so hard because they're trying to sell this house across the street, directly across the street from his headstone. I mean, because his headstone literally sits on the fence line.
Yeah,
and the
it's
road's
right
there.
And
so they're trying to sell this house. Okay, the cemetery already has like 14,000 graves there. So that's a hard sell already. Okay, but you're across the street from Alfred Packard's grave and everybody comes to visit it. And so we're standing there with all this electronic equipment and this realtor comes up and I have never gotten the stink eye like I got from this woman. Great.
I love it. Oh, they should have. I mean, I don't know how many times I've sat and had lunch with Alfred because there's a bench at there's not a ton of benches in the cemetery. His is one of the best benches because it's under a tree, so it's shady.
Yeah, it looks
and
like
I take lunch breaks there regularly because of my job. And I like sitting on Alfred's bench and having lunch. Also, I wanted to answer. I noticed Roxy asked us a question. Is it Alfred or Alfred? Alfred? Or Alferd. It is spelled both ways throughout his life in a lot of historical records.
So he is buried in cement. Okay.
Well, he is now. He wasn't originally, but they ended up cementing over his grave because people
like us.
Well,
we're
people
desecrating it too.
Steal it.
Actually, we were very respectful.
We were. And but he does have, if you notice, he has the military headstone because he was an honorably discharged Civil War veteran. So when he died and was buried, they did give him that particular headstone because he did earn it as a Civil War veteran. So, but eventually, and I can't remember when they decided to cover over his grave in cement, but, many years ago, probably back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, people would come through, especially at Halloween. There were pranks that would happen because of his grave, all of that. So for its protection, they finally cemented over it to protect it.
if I was looking at that house, that would be like a huge selling point for me to buy
Oh,
the
yeah.
house. Okay,
I
come on.
totally
I'm
would
right
buy
next
a
to the
house right
cemetery and
across the
Alfred's
street
here.
from
Come
the
on.
cemetery. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so funny. And this was like before we all got together at his grave. You know, it was like a couple of months prior to that. It was just so funny. This woman, she just, I mean, I've never gotten the stink eye like I did.
She just could have waved.
I just think that's hilarious. Well, I mean, you have to know if you're a realtor, the cemetery is going to turn some people off anyway. Not even considering Alfred's grave is right there.
Right.
Like a cemetery will turn some people off, but there's a lot of people that like me and like you and all of us that would totally buy the house across the street from the cemetery.
Definitely.
Even more, I'd take it from Alfred Packer. That's fine. I have not heard any horrible haunting stories about Littleton Cemetery out there. So, in fact, somebody had asked me once, I went and looked just out of curiosity to see if there were any ghost stories about the cemetery. The only one that I can find, that I've been able to find that's been documented, is a goat that haunts the cemetery. And supposedly the goat belonged to Alfred Packer. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he had goats.
Goodness.
But they say it's his goat that wanders through the cemetery as a little ghost. That's it. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about living across the street from Littleton Cemetery.
Mr. Martini says the neighbors are quiet.
Exactly.
Yes, they are.
The trains that run on the other side of the cemetery are louder than the cemetery itself. So
it's so funny. Well, this is the plaque that's next to his grave.
That is a nice plaque.
Yeah, isn't that? It's here. I went past it. Let me go back. Yeah, it's a really nice plaque. And the people that put that up, I kind of go into the people that put that up. This is the Eclapis Vitus organization, and they're an organization that they preserve the heritage of the American West, and especially any history that has to do with the mother lode and gold mining in the region. And so they're the ones that erected the bench. They got their name like
on the back of the bench, yeah.
And then they have all these amulets on their on his plaque. So this is about the swindling story. There it is. This is the pin cushion.
They did, Roxy.
So it's a pin cushion on the top there, and this is a buffalo horn. And on this description, which is a very old description in the museum, it says pin cushion made by a prisoner at Canyon City, Colorado, sentenced for man eating.
Well,
were they trying to protect
exactly who it was?
Yeah, were they trying to protect his identity or something? They just put a person.
Well, somebody figured out, just like the gun, the curators, they figured out that this was connected to Alfred Packer. Just like the gun, they figured out, wait a minute, this was his gun, and it was standard issue to Civil War soldiers. And they actually did ballistics with that gun and realized that that was the gun that shot Bell, who was supposedly the one running around with the hatchet. So, and there's Roxy and Jenny and I in the same cemetery. We had lunch with Alfred.
Yeah, I was trying to see which grave that was. I can't.
It looks like it says Maywood.
Is that
Marwood?
The Littleton family gravesite, though?
Harwood.
Yeah, I think that's the founder of Littleton. That's their family's buried all right there. And that was the one I kept trying to find that I was walking right past a million times because I was looking for something slightly different. But we found it that day. I was so excited, and we took pictures.
Well, that's all, and then I couldn't believe it. I showed you something in the cemetery, and you know that cemetery backwards and forward.
But I didn't know that story.
Huh?
I didn't know the story you told me that day.
Yeah, the Springer Summit at the Springer headstone. We had a hard time finding that. So that was a whole nother true crime story.
Which is one you might have to feature, because I didn't know that story until you told me that day. So
Yeah, I've been collecting the evidence, like not evidence, but
Stories?
footage for like
Yeah.
years for that. But that was
Cool.
based on a love triangle that happened in the Brown Palace Hotel in downtown Denver. And
which was
yeah.
apparently pretty famous. I mean, almost as famous as some of our other love triangles, but I hadn't heard of that one before.
It was one of the most famous court cases that, you know, it was a big deal in its day. And when was that? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like the turn of the century.
Yeah.
And but it was, you know, a socialite that was the woman keeping two men. And so but yeah, that's a story for another time.
Yeah. You know, it led to some trouble. But we did find the grave. We did have to pull up a map. I remember we pulled up a map on like my phone or something, and we eventually found it, but it was a lot of us walking like back and forth up the roads. We knew we were in the generally right area of the cemetery, but it was just going through one at a time and looking at each and every stone to find it until we did find it.
How big is Littleton? How big is the cemetery?
I believe it's got about 14,000 bodies in it. It's not huge. And I was trying to see if I had in my notes from originally how big, like size wise it is. I don't know if I have that in my notes. I do know it was founded in about 1875. So it hadn't been there very long when Alfred Packer was put in the ground
about
there.
30 some years, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. It was not very old at the time of his burial, but I don't remember acreage wise what size it is. It's not, I mean, it's a decent size, but it's not huge.
Right. Like you could easily walk from one end to the other.
Yeah.
And that's Packard's second headstone. His first one was stolen.
Yeah.
That's why he's in cement. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So somebody out there's got his first headstone, but you know.
Yeah, one day it'll turn up somewhere really weird and maybe then we can return and then he could have two headstones. That'd be cool. Or they'll put it in a museum.
Well, have you ever heard that Ripley, believe it or not, claims to have his skull?
I have heard that.
Really?
But I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
Obviously, we would only know if we exhumed his grave, and with all the cement over it, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Exactly. Those are my exact words in my video that's going to be on after this.
Yeah. But I didn't see your video.
So we should wrap this up. Ladies, this has been absolutely wonderful discussion.
Fun.
It has. This has been a great time.
We have to do this more often.
This is my first live doing something like this. And this was, I was nervous. Yeah. You know, everything perfect. But it's like, this was so much fun.
The three of us could talk all night long about graves.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
And you know, it's what we do. We go out and we cemetery wander and we find people's stories and we you know, we bring people alive again by telling their story and saying their names. And there's a lot of people out there that have just been forgotten and have just whisked away and, you know, in the wind. And we don't want them to be forgotten. No. And so that's what we do. Is that we go to these cemeteries and find these people and tell their stories. And
there's some amazing people that we have learned so much about. It's incredible that their stories haven't been known before. So this is
exactly incredible stories of people who built our history. And they're just forgotten. And just because you know, you weren't a president or a congressman or whatever, but you were a pioneer and you blazed a trail across the land. And it doesn't mean that you're not any less important than somebody else. That's known, you know, so it's kind of our mission. So definitely make sure that you check out these ladies' podcast, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery. On the top of this chat pinned is URL to their podcast, and you come out once a week?
Yes, every Thursday.
Every Thursday, okay. Yep. And so I also have on the screen the actual website, and then you can also find them on Facebook. And then make sure that as soon as you leave here that you go check out the video. We give you a tour on Generations Found. We give you a tour of the gravesite and also go over some of the things that we talked about tonight. And and then also make sure that you check out Generations Found and that you subscribe to us. We are a sub-site of Colorado Martini. I know there's a lot of Colorado Martini subscribers and followers in the chat right now. But Colorado Martini and Generations Found are by the same people, and we appreciate